Hello, this is Vlad and a new story from my channel, Amazing Life Stories. And bring me a sweater, Edic ordered, looking at his wife. Marina frowned, showing her displeasure. This was her husband's third business trip this month. She was tired of spending every weekend alone with their daughter. She wanted to get away with the family, like all normal people. I hope this is our last business trip, Marina said, handing him her things. Her voice sounded as if she were deeply offended. Quote, "But that's up to management," the head of the family replied. "Do you think I like this myself? If it were up to me, I'd spend every weekend with you." "Well, then talk to your boss," she continued. "Explain that you have a wife and a little daughter, and they all need your attention." The Raghavs were raising 5-year-old Dasha together. However, the girl was adopted. Marina found her on the doorstep of the children's clinic where she worked as a nurse. It was late, and Marina was about to return home when she came across a white bundle from which cried sounds were coming. Since she loved children very much, she could not pass by. The baby had apparently been abandoned to her fate. Marina almost immediately became obsessed with the idea of taking her in. A couple of days later, thanks to the surveillance cameras belonging to the store across the street, they managed to find the nulliparous mother. The woman had renounced her parental rights because she had no means of support. Quote, "I could have at least left her inside the hospital," Marina lamented. "But only a heartless woman would abandon a child on the street, where she could freeze and die." Quote. After that, Marina adopted the foundling, and she and her husband named her Dasha. Unfortunately, the baby soon developed developmental disabilities. She could not learn to walk or hold her head up for a very long time. Doctors even said that the child might never be able to stand up. However, thanks to massages and various procedures, Dashenka started walking. But the problems did not end there. The girl continued to lag behind her peers. And if she never outgrows it, the husband frowned. "I'm not ready for her to sit on my neck all her life." "This will not happen," Marina answered confidently. "Dasha is a strong girl. She will be able to overcome everything and will become no worse than her peers." Estik did not really believe in this, but he did not try to convince his wife otherwise. "If I talk to the boss, I'm afraid I won't have a job anymore," the husband chuckled. There was nothing to say to that. Losing a job was dangerous, because finding a new one seemed pretty difficult, especially when there was an urgent need for money. And considering that they were raising a special daughter, there was always such a need. Quote, "Marin, leave it, it's useless anyway," the mother-in-law waved her hand. "Here, put the pyroshene knife in too." The daughter-in-law sighed. Nina Grigorievna had been instructing her son all morning today on what and how to put it with him. Quote, "And why would he need it?" The woman chuckled. But she still did as she was told. Quote, "It will come in handy," the mother-in-law said confidently. Marina had a trusting relationship with her husband's mother. However, Nina Grigorievna had become so much a part of their lives lately that her daughter-in-law immediately believed all the jokes about her mother-in-law. Since they had never argued before, she felt awkward asking Nina Grigorievna to stop interfering in their lives. Then Marina asked her husband to gently hint to her mother that it was time for her to let him go and reduce her influence. "Really, Edic, talk to her. I respect your mother very much, but sometimes her advice gets on my nerves. Come on, she wants the best." And in the end, everything remained in place, and Marina continued to endure. When the packing was done, the Raghavs went to the airport together. "Come back soon," Marina asked when her husband had checked in. "You know, it doesn't depend on me," Dort shrugged. And that was it. As Marina passed by the coffee shop, she couldn't resist reaching into her purse to treat herself to a small cappuccino. However, the next moment she had already forgotten that she wanted coffee. Somehow, a note appeared in her purse, with only 2 words written in large handwriting: "Be careful." An inexplicable feeling of anxiety immediately began to spread under her body. Of course, it could have been someone's stupid joke, but for some reason Marina didn't think so. "Young lady, are you standing in line?" Someone's displeased voice was heard from behind, and she had to step away. Looking at the time, Marina realized that her husband's plane had already taken off. She couldn't call him now. Then she simply decided to go home. But the whole way she couldn't get the note out of her head. Analyzing her last movements, she came to the conclusion that only her mother-in-law could have left the message. There was no one else. But if she wanted to warn me about something, why not say it directly, the inner voice asked. Then Marina stepped on the gas and sped up to talk to Nina Grigorievna. A new shock awaited her at home. As soon as she knocked on the door, instead of her mother-in-law, the police officers opened the door. Quote, "What happened?" Not understanding anything, she asked. The next moment, her mother-in-law noticed. The elderly woman was standing in handcuffs, but instead of fear, her face showed calm and complete acceptance of the situation. Quote, "I understand that this is you, Marina Sergeyevna Rogova?" The lieutenant clarified, ignoring her question. "Yes," she answered, confused. "Maybe you know where your husband is now?" The policeman continued asking questions. His plane had left on a business trip, well, not more than an hour ago. Marina answered, getting more and more worried. So what happened and why these questions? She was ready to explode. At the moment, members of a criminal group, of which your relatives are a part, are being detained, the representative of the law grinned. Marina felt her eye twitch. It sounded so ridiculous that she wanted to laugh. However, the situation was not conducive to it. Quote, "Are you serious now?" She looked at her fragile elderly mother-in-law. But instead of being indignant and trying to justify herself, Nina Grigorievna only lowered her head, just so as not to meet her daughter-in-law's gaze. Quote, "Absolutely," the lieutenant replied. The tension grew with each passing minute. Quote, "Why are you silent, huh?" Marina could not stand it, turning to her mother-in-law, but she still did not answer. Quote, "That's enough. Let's go to the station," the policeman said. "If you want, you can come with us. You will find out all the details there." So Marina went to the station for the first time in her life. And she really wanted it to be the last. After the interrogation, Nina Grigorievna was immediately taken to a cell, and no matter how much the daughter-in-law asked to be released on bail, the guardians of the law remained deaf to her requests. The only thing she could count on was a short meeting. "She's an elderly woman," Marina shook her head, watching her mother-in-law being led away. "So what?" The investigator grinned. "As if pensioners don't commit crimes. The law is the same for everyone." She had to wait until the evening to be allowed to talk to her husband's mother. All this time, Marina was at the station, also answering questions, mostly about her husband. In the eyes of the police, Eduard was the real criminal, and now they were trying to determine whether Marina was his accomplice. Quote, "I don't know anything about this," she said. "And I'm sure you're wrong. My husband and mother-in-law are honest people. They've never done anything wrong in their lives." But the truth really began to emerge when I talked to Nina Grigorievna. "Please tell me that this whole monstrous misunderstanding only happened after I found myself in the pre-trial detention center," Marina asked. But her mother-in-law only shook her head sadly. "It's going to be a long story," she said, leaning back in her chair. Marina glanced at the time. "A policeman will come for her in half an hour. I'll start by saying that Edek isn't my biological child," Nina Grigorievna sighed. "His real mother died when he was still a boy. I became a nanny at his father's request." Marina's mouth even dropped open in shock. She certainly didn't expect this. "Does Samdik know?" It flashed through her mind. It turned out that Pyotr, her husband's father, was in a criminal group, and occupied one of the central positions there. He controlled the entire city, being, in fact, a criminal authority. However, a redistribution of power began in their gang. Some began to cooperate with the police and soon gave up their accomplices. A raid was organized and a shootout began. During this arrest, Edic's father died from a bullet from his former accomplice. The police caught the surviving members of the group. A series of arrests began. Moreover, representatives of the law actively took on the relatives of the suspects, since many in the criminal group were connected to each other. So that the child would not be left alone, I pretended to be his mother, the mother-in-law continued. Fortunately, the police quickly stopped asking us questions, and we were able to start a new life. So Edic knows that you are not his mother? Marina couldn't help but ask. Of course, the mother-in-law grinned. Nina Grigorievna herself led an honest life, had never been involved in crime. The boss's dealings really scared her, but she could not abandon his son, since she quickly became attached to Edic and believed that she could re-educate him, and criminal roots would not grow. How wrong I was, the mother-in-law winced. They say correctly, the apple does not fall far from the tree. Marina was dumbfounded. She so hoped that everything the police told her was an absurd mistake. However, her husband really was a criminal. Did Edic kill someone? She asked in an excited voice. I never interfered in his affairs, Nina Grigorievna shook her head. But I wouldn't say for sure that he's not capable of it. Marina went cold. It turned out that she didn't know the man with whom she lived under the same roof. It turned out that all the numerous business trips were nothing more than a screen that Edic used to commit his crimes. Realizing that he lived in a small town, the man specially went far away so that no one could recognize him and hand him over to the police. He thought of everything, Marina swallowed. Nina Grigorievna was very worried. She still hoped that her son would be able to pull himself together and stop all this. Despite his actions, she continued to love him with the same love with which she fell in love with a little boy who was once left without a mother. Edic knew that the police were on to him. Finally, the puzzle in Marina's head began to come together, so he suddenly went on another business trip. His mother-in-law nodded. Edic received a tip from some acquaintance of his mother said. He realized that it was dangerous to stay in the city any longer, so he went on the run. Marina grimaced. She didn't like to think that her husband was a criminal, and it was even scarier to think about how many people he had harmed. And what would he do? Marina asked in shock, clutching her head. Was he planning to sit it out and come back? Or was that it? But Nina Grigorievna herself didn't know anything. Wait, the daughter-in-law suddenly perked up. Why did they take you? You haven't done anything. Try to prove it, the elderly woman grinned. Despite everything, Nina Grigorievna remained calm. She knew perfectly well that she had done nothing wrong, and therefore she was not threatened with trial or prison. She believed that the police would figure everything out, and her return home was only a matter of time. I received your note, Marina suddenly recalled. Oh, I was afraid we might not see each other again, so I decided to warn you this way, the mother-in-law explained. Be careful, Marina. At this phrase, the daughter-in-law felt her entire body covered in a wave of goosebumps. You're alone now. You'll have to take care of yourself. Quote. The mother-in-law wanted to say something else, but broke into a fit of dry coughing. Are you okay? The daughter-in-law got worried. Let me ask for some water. Everything is fine, the mother-in-law cut her off. Especially since you and I are in prison, and not in a restaurant, so they should bring me water. Nina Grigorievna had been seriously ill for several months. The doctors had given her a serious diagnosis, insisting that the woman immediately begin treatment. However, not only did she not do this, but she also decided not to tell anyone about her illness. Apparently, I am destined to spend my last days sitting behind bars, she thought with complete humility, fully accepting the situation. Nina Grigorievna had lived a long life and therefore was now ready for any development of events. If they release her, great. If she does not live to see this moment, then apparently such is her fate, and nothing can be done about it. However, the daughter-in-law was completely different. Marina was already thinking about who she could contact to find a good lawyer. The main thing is, don't worry, she said, taking her mother-in-law's wrinkled hand. Quote, I'll definitely get you out of here. Nina Grigorievna just smiled. Soon the guard came, informing her that their time was up and it was time for Marina to leave. After she left, she started calling everyone she could to find a lawyer. She knew her mother-in-law wouldn't be able to last long behind bars. It was hard for her to be there for half an hour, let alone longer. And no matter how bad she felt, Marina couldn't afford to lie there and suffer. She had to go to work. She had already missed half a day and couldn't afford to do it anymore. Thoughts of marriage haunted her. The last few hours had turned her life upside down, making her doubt the person closest and dearest to her. But was a criminal really capable of being an exemplary family member? Marina seriously doubted it. Now she was sure that her husband only needed her marriage as a cover, and had no intention of there was no talk of feelings. Since she lived in a small town, the incident with her mother-in-law's arrest very quickly became public knowledge. Nosy neighbors talked about nothing else. Quote, and I thought Nina Grigorievna was a decent woman, an elderly neighbor said with surprise. Her daughter worked as a cleaner at the same clinic as Marina, so the news had reached her workplace. Lost in her thoughts, she didn't immediately notice everyone was looking at her askance. After it became known that Eduard was a criminal, his wife was no longer considered an honest woman. No one wanted to eat lunch with Marina, so she often sat alone in the cafeteria. Patients also didn't want to be seen by such a nurse. When, right before her eyes, a mother and child turned and left, Marina began to realize that she was gradually becoming an outcast. She was incredibly upset, because it wasn't her fault. Hello, Kristen, she said, calling the mother of her young patients, whom she always helped with certificates and examinations. Can your husband help me? He was a lawyer, so Marina hoped that, remembering their old friendship, he would take up her mother-in-law's case. It won't work, Christina replied coldly. Kolya couldn't risk his reputation by helping criminals, and after these words, she hung up. As if I'd ever help anyone again, Marina thought discontentedly, realizing she had no one left to rely on. Not only she, but Dasha, too, felt the people's disdain. The teachers began to regard her with increasing suspicion, worried that the daughter of a criminal could harm other children. One girl's earrings had gone missing online at the most inopportune moment. Naturally, everyone immediately assumed Dasha was to blame. Open your locker, the teacher sternly demanded. The girl cringed, but complied. Then the woman scattered all her things on the floor, but the lost jewelry was never found. The little girl was upset at being considered a thief, and she couldn't hold back her tears. The funniest thing was that the earrings were soon found. It turned out that the little owner had forgotten them while playing with a dollhouse. Okay, maybe we were wrong this time, but isn't a criminal's daughter capable of kinship? The teacher dismissed. We need to keep our ears open now. Dasha heard it all perfectly. A growing confusion grew in her childish mind. Why her dad was being called a criminal, why they were treating her so badly when she hadn't done anything herself. Dasha couldn't understand anything, but she really longed for her mother. Marina always found the right words to calm her daughter. The search for Eduard continued. For this purpose, the wife was summoned to the station again for a second statement. A few days later, the house was searched. Your husband hasn't contacted you, the investigator sternly clarified. Yes, I already told you that no, Marina said, starting to get angry. I have no idea where he is now. He left me too, without even warning me. She spoke with such expression that the police believed her. Although before that, they checked her call history and were forced to admit that the suspect really did not try to call his wife. His description has been sent to all airports in the country, the policeman said. So his capture is only a matter of time. Marina nodded. She herself already wanted her husband to be found and for all this to end. She tried to distract herself with work. Although she had fewer patients, she still managed to find something to do at the clinic, otherwise she would have definitely gone crazy. Marina, you're fired. The head doctor's words shocked her. She could not even immediately understand their meaning. Wait, why? What did I do wrong? Quote. The decision was made as a result of your systematic lateness. The boss snapped. But I'm never late, the nurse frowned. But I always show up at work before everyone else. And that was the absolute truth. Since Marina lived far away, she had to get up before dawn to have time to warm up the car. And so it turned out that she showed up before everyone else. Usually, only the security guard met her at the hospital, each time amazed at what time she arrived at work. The boss understood this perfectly well, but he could not keep a criminal's wife on staff. He was worried that the bad reputation could spread to the hospital, which, of course, was not to his advantage. Therefore, having agreed with the management, he personally changed the work schedule without warning Marina. And so it turned out that she really was late. But you did it on purpose, she said in a lifeless voice. To get rid of me. Pack your things, the former boss answered her briefly. She had to submit. Now she was left not only without a husband, mother-in-law, but also without a job, which she loved very much. Returning to an empty apartment, she felt so lonely that her soul became unbearably heavy. Marina was impatiently waiting for the end of the day to pick up Dasha and not feel this melancholy. The search for work began the next day. It was impossible to stay at home. The walls were pressing down on her, and therefore she urgently needed to occupy herself with some activity. And an important point was that the money was running out. Edic left nothing, and her salary was almost exhausted. Marina could not find anything suitable for a long time. Somewhere there were no vacancies, and someone directly said that he did not want to hire an employee with such a reputation. At a moment when she was close to despair, she learned unexpected news. The police were finally able to understand that Nina Grigorievna's guilt was only in the fact that she was unable to properly raise her son, and therefore it was decided to release the elderly woman on recognizance not to leave. Marina was overjoyed and hugged her mother-in-law tightly when she met her at the pre-trial detention center. She didn't blame the elderly woman for what had happened, understanding that she was simply a victim of circumstances. Edic hadn't called. This was the first thing her mother asked upon seeing her daughter-in-law. Marina shook her head gloomily. Nina Grigorievna's shoulders even slumped. The main thing is that everything is okay with him, she said sadly. Marina suppressed her irritation. She couldn't feel sorry for her husband, who was the cause of so many problems in their family. Dasha told her mother what she had to endure online. "Darling, it's not your fault," Marina said tenderly. "Some people just don't know how to behave." "Mom, maybe I shouldn't go there?" Quote. Her daughter asked tearfully. Marina's heart sank with the realization that this whole situation had affected her little girl. She shouldn't have to suffer because of her father's mistakes. Of course, Marina tried to smile. "You will stay with Grandma." She had just returned from the sanatorium. In order not to traumatize the child's psyche, Marina lied to her, saying that Grandma had gone on vacation to get some treatment. But in fact, the elderly woman's health was deteriorating even more. And this was one of the reasons why she was released from the pre-trial detention center. No one needed the death of a pensioner whose guilt, moreover, had not been proven. But Nina Grigorievna continued to hide her condition. Seeing how hard it was for Marina now, she decided not to aggravate the already difficult situation. Soon her daughter-in-law managed to find a job. The only place that was ready to take her was a social fund for helping homeless people. She immediately agreed. She had never felt disgust towards such people, and she had no choice. Therefore, Marina soon began her new duties. The social fund needed a doctor, so Marina fit their requirements perfectly. The previous nurse had gone on maternity leave, and the position had been vacant for several months. After reviewing what was being offered, Marina was somewhat perplexed. She felt there should be far more medications available, especially since many of the center's visitors had various complaints. She tried to discuss this with the director, but he was in a hurry and couldn't spare the time. "I have a terrible headache, it's splitting," complained one of the homeless people. It was an elderly grandmother. She could barely walk, using a cane. Marina looked at the meager first aid kit and realized there was nothing she could do. "Wait a little," she said, and, grabbing her jacket, headed to the nearest pharmacy. She had to stock up heavily to help her charges, and it had taken a significant toll on her wallet. But at least the homeless people felt better. "Thank you, daughter," the grandmother smiled warmly. Soon, Marina noticed that the few medications she kept in her office were disappearing altogether. They were in short supply and significantly more expensive than headache pills. But there was no other option. She had to buy them too. Just in case, Marina decided to keep the receipts. "Can you spare me a couple of minutes?" She finally managed to reach the boss and decided to have a serious talk with him. Of course, he smiled. "I was just looking for you so I could have a chat too. I think I'll go first." Quote. His eyes flashed. "I've noticed, Rihanna, that you've taken your responsibilities a bit too seriously. I'd like to urge you to slow down." Quote. "What do you mean?" The nurse didn't understand. "I want you to stop using medication so often," the boss stated bluntly. "Switch to something else. Our organization needs to economize." Quote. "Sorry, but I can't treat people with roadside assistance," Marina chuckled. "So, I'll have to master this science," the boss narrowed his eyes. Marina widened her eyes at him. "Are you really serious about all this? If you want to continue working here, then listen to my words. If not, no one will keep you here." Quote. And with that, their conversation ended. Marina was left alone with her gloomy thoughts. The situation was hopeless, without medicine. Even with her medical knowledge, she couldn't do anything. And spending her own money was out of the question, otherwise her family would have to starve. All she could do was hope that somehow, miraculously, everything would work out. Hurrying to work in the morning, Marina was already going there in a depressed mood, as her medicine was running low, and she had to tell some of the homeless people outright that she couldn't help them, and she thought about this constantly. The road ran past a pond, which Marina usually admired along the way, and suddenly noticed something strange. And, looking closer, she realized a person was drowning there. "Oh, my God!" she exclaimed, stopping the car and immediately running toward him. It was mid-spring, but it was still not warm enough for swimming season. Nevertheless, the nurse quickly threw off her light jacket and ran to the drowning man. He was a young and rather large man, whom she barely pulled to shore. For a moment, she thought they would go together, he was so heavy. Once on the shore, Marina began trying to revive him, turning him on his side and gently pressing on his back so he could spit out all the water he had swallowed. Finally, after a couple of long minutes, characteristic sounds were heard. The stranger was gradually coming to. "Thank you," he said hoarsely. Marina only nodded. "How did you end up in the water?" The rescuer couldn't help but ask. "Oh, through my own stupidity," the man admitted. His name was Ruslan. He was a few minutes ago, he'd noticed a wealthy lady strolling across the bridge drop a brooch. So he jumped in after it, but misjudged his own strength and the current's speed, and started drowning. If Marina hadn't arrived, his fate would have been very grim. "Did he even manage to retrieve the brooch?" she asked, shaking her head. "Of course," the man said triumphantly, taking his trophy out of his pocket, which almost cost him his life. Marina looked at her clothes. Everything was soaking wet, and it was impossible to show up for work in such a state. She decided to go home to change. Ruslan offered to walk her to the car, and they had a short conversation. It turned out that in the past, the had a good job, an apartment, but his own sister had deceived him. She took away his housing and did everything to get him fired. So disappointed in his own fate, Ruslan chose the lifestyle of a "Yes, you can live so many years with a person under the same roof, but still not get to know him," Marina nodded encouragingly. "Also a sad experience," Ruslan asked. She nodded, not wanting to go into details. Quote, "Thank you again," the sincerely thanked. "I think it would be right if I give her to you." And Ruslan handed her the brooch. It was a very beautiful piece in the shape of a swan, so precious and probably very expensive. Quote, "No, it's not worth it," Marina shook her head. "Well, it wasn't for nothing that you took such a risk to get it." "Yes, but you showed me that there are things much more important than some trinket." And he, placing the jewelry in her palm, said goodbye. Despite the cold morning swim and being late for work, meeting Ruslan left a pleasant aftertaste. He seemed like a good, pleasant man, who was out on the street solely because of his sister's betrayal. When Marina finally showed up at work, she found her boss in his office. He was sitting at her desk, apparently waiting for her to appear. Quote, "So you've been caught, Rogova," he said maliciously. "Do you think I won't find out about you stealing medicine?" "No way, I know everything." Marina frowned. Looking over her shoulder, she noticed that the cabinet with drugs was half empty, although she had filled it yesterday. "It wasn't me," the nurse said in a steely voice. Their recent conversation surfaced in her memory, and she began to understand what this drama was leading to. Besides the boss, there were several other employees in the nurse's office. And, apparently, witnesses, she guessed. Quote, "You were the only one with the keys to the storage room with the drugs," the boss continued to press. "So there was no one else who could have committed such a crime. To steal from the poor and the needy. It's incomprehensible." Marina wanted to cry and laugh at the same time. It was too ridiculous, terrible and unfair. Quote, "You also had the keys," she noted reasonably. "How dare you blame me?" The offended boss began to get irritated. "This evening there will be a consultation, at which the question of your behavior will be brought up." And with these words, the small delegation left the office. Marina felt so tired from this theatrics that she sank exhausted onto the sofa. Quote, "When will these endless problems end?" she said angrily, covering her face with her hands. Marina had already forgotten the last time she had slept normally, and not been tormented by obsessive thoughts about work, her husband, her daughter, or her mother-in-law. The time before the consultation dragged on endlessly. She had already managed to walk around the fund several times. When she was finally invited, she noticed that in the center there was a table where 3 people were sitting, one of whom was her boss. A proud grin was on his face, which literally screamed that he was already a winner, and Marina was finished. Other employees of the social fund were seated on the opposite side. Quote, "You are accused of stealing expensive medical drugs," the unfamiliar gray-haired man began. "What can you say in your defense?" Quote. And then Marina told everything she knew, starting from the very moment she had just gotten a job and ending with a recent conversation with her boss. "It's true," the chairman of the council was surprised, turning to Marina's boss. "Of course not." He quickly retracted. The nurse continued, "To treat the patients, I had to buy medications at my own expense, and she left it to the Cheka Commission. So what's the point of stealing from myself?" The commission was stunned. The boss made it sound as if a real thief was about to appear before them, but in fact, she turned out to be a more than honest woman. Then they asked him to wait, and they retired to make a decision. In the end, Marina was acquitted of all charges and was able to keep her job. Her boss took the news with gritted teeth. After the council, she was able to breathe a sigh of relief, but only briefly. When she returned home, problems arose again. Nina Grigorievna felt ill. Luckily, a neighbor dropped by at that moment and was able to call an ambulance. Dasha was nearby. The little girl was very scared. Quote, "Mom, is Grandma going to die?" the girl asked, fear in her eyes. She'd said so herself when the doctor came to see her. Quote, "Of course not, Marina, my dear," hastened to console her daughter. "Grandma's just a little out of it. They'll treat her, and she won't talk such nonsense anymore." After calming Dasha down, she went to the clinic. There she learned that her mother-in-law had been hiding her illness for a long time. Nina Grigorievna had reached a critical point, and so she was left in the hospital under close observation. The elderly woman never regained consciousness. Quote, "There's no point in you being here," the doctor said. "Patsitka could remain in this state for hours. I'll call you when she comes to." Marina went home, and since there was no one else to look after Dasha, her daughter had to go back online. Meanwhile, another problem arose. Every day, the little girl threw tantrums to avoid going anywhere, and in the evenings, she returned sad because she was being bullied. Marina went to the boarding school several times to talk to the teachers. However, it was of little use. Dasha still returned in tears. At such moments, Marina felt herself on the verge of hysterics. She was torn between work, where her boss was bullying her, and home, where Dasha was upset and her mother was helpless. The only thing that consoled her was talking to Ruslan, who had become a good friend. The man listened and tried to offer advice. Quote, "I think I'm just a little bit closer to breaking down," Marina admitted, unafraid to show her weakness. "You'll get through it," the encouraged. "You're one of the strongest women I've ever met. You just need to take a few days off, recuperate, and then you'll come back even stronger and be able to handle anything." His warm words and sincere faith in her gave her strength. After such conversations, she walked home calmer. On the weekend, when Marina decided to sleep in, she suddenly heard an insistent ringing at the door. Her first thought was of her husband, and so, scalded, she ran to answer it. However, her thoughts were not destined to become reality. A stranger stood on the threshold. Quote, "I'm Edic's mistress," she said instead of a greeting. Marina grabbed the doorframe to keep from falling. Quote, "This is some kind of joke," she frowned. "Would I joke with someone like that?" The unexpected guests threw up their hands. Her name was Polina. She walked past unceremoniously, entering the apartment. At that moment, Marina noticed that the woman was pregnant. The father, too shocked to formulate her thoughts, asked, quote, "Yes, it's Edic's child," Polina smiled. "And now I'll be living here." Marina's face fell at such impudence. "Are you sure you're right?" She began to get angry. "If you want, you can run to your lover. I don't care. You can take the whole thing, but don't even look at the apartment. It's mine. I know half of it belongs to Eduard." Polina narrowed her eyes. "Which means it belongs to us and his child too." Marina felt her hands clench into fists. "I won't let you live here," she said belligerently. A loud argument broke out between them, which could be heard even in the entryway. But no matter how much Marina tried to prove that this was her apartment, Polina didn't care. She wasn't going to leave. Quote, "And you have the decency to throw a pregnant woman out on the street?" She clutched her stomach. In the end, Marina simply gave up. She no longer had the energy to argue. Quote, "Stay in the hall, in my room, don't even dare stick your nose in," she growled. Polya only smirked, realizing she had gotten what she wanted. Quote, "You just couldn't get Edic pregnant. That's why you're furious," her lover called after her. Marina only closed her eyes, ordering herself to breathe and not react to this provocation. Now she couldn't feel free even in her own home. After all, the reminder of her husband's betrayal and lies constantly flickered nearby. With Polina's arrival in her life, Marina became increasingly convinced that her marriage with Eduard was over. Nothing could be fixed. And the only way out was divorce. She didn't want to live with him anymore. First, with a criminal, and second, with a cheater. It was an extremely dangerous combination. Polina was already comfortable with everything. She strolled leisurely around the apartment, considering herself the rightful mistress. Occasionally, they had minor squabbles, but no major conflicts. Marina often visited her mother-in-law in the hospital, telling her about how their life was now organized. Nina Grigorievna was still weak and sometimes couldn't even speak, so she mostly acted as a listener. Then Marina had to carefully filter the information she provided, so as not to worry the already ill woman. Quote, "It's okay, I can handle it," her daughter-in-law would say with a smile at the end of each visit. And once she even brought her mother-in-law a drawing Dasha had made for her grandmother. After Marina left, Nina Grigorievna became completely emotional. She asked for a lawyer to come and rewrite the will in favor of her daughter-in-law. The lawyer would definitely not be lost. He would certainly be able to get some money for himself. Quote, "I'd better take care of Marina and the girl," the mother-in-law mused. She couldn't boast of much wealth, but she did have a small house outside the city, one might even say in the middle of nowhere. Now Marina became its owner. 3 days after Nina Grigorievna wrote her will, she passed away. As if sensing her demise, she asked the lawyer to hurry. And as it turned out, not in vain. Marina received a call from the hospital late at night, when she was already asleep. Seeing the unfamiliar number, her heart skipped a beat. Deep down, she knew who could be calling her and why. Quote, "Okay, I'll come in the morning." She spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling. She had absolutely no desire to sleep. Her chest was tight with pain and regret. Tears ran down her cheeks, but Marina silently wiped them away and tried to breathe deeply. Quote, "You haven't answered my calls for a few days, but I think you should know this," she sighed, recording a message for her husband on the answering machine. "Your mother, or rather, your adoptive mother, passed away last night. The funeral is the day after tomorrow." She wasn't sure that Eduard would hear this, but she still tried to warn him. The last few days had been crazy. Marina was constantly rushing around the city, either arranging for the funeral, or with the hospital, or to work. She came home late, so she didn't even have time to spend time with Dasha. Quote, "Mom, I also want a belly like Polina's," the little girl said once when they were having breakfast together. This statement made Marina laugh. She barely held back a smile. Quote, "Also, you're still very little," her mother explained. "First you need to grow up, start a family, and only then think about a belly like that." "And why?" The girl was sincerely perplexed. "I could just ask Polina to wear it." At these words, Mom choked on her coffee. "What do you mean, wear it?" Marina asked, clearing her throat. "Well, she takes it off and then puts it on. I want that too," Dasha smiled. And then Marina seriously tensed up. Was this mistress really pregnant? She shared the information with Ruslan when they met again. "Dasha couldn't have made this up," Marina said. "Something's wrong here. Set up a camera, then you'll find out for sure," the advised. "The main thing is to do it discreetly." Marina decided it was a good idea, so she followed the advice. A couple of days later, she had ironclad proof that Polina was a real swindler who used a fake belly. The camera clearly showed her taking off the fake belly and walking around without it all day, confident that Marina and Dasha would be gone all day. "What a," Marina couldn't help but say. "Well, I'll make life fun." She barged into the apartment when her lover was completely unexpected. She grabbed her hand and abruptly lifted her off the couch. "What are you doing? That's crazy," Polina screamed immediately. "What if you harm my child?" "I know there's no child," Marina hissed and squeezed the foam rubber on her stomach to prove her point. Polina had suffered a complete fiasco. She had no reason to stay in this apartment any longer. However, she still tried to do it, and then Marina needed Ruslan's help. Together they threw the impudent girl out onto the landing, and then Marina obligingly handed her her suitcase. True, she did this by throwing it from the 5th floor, but nevertheless the owner got all her things back. "You're awesome," Roma chuckled, watching this scene. "Oh yeah," Marina tossed her hair. With Polina gone from her life, she was able to breathe deeply. Now, at least, she could feel like the mistress of the house again, and the annoying guest was no longer underfoot. The next day, Marina went to meet with a lawyer, who told her about Nina Grigorievna's will. Dasha asked to go with her, so she had to agree, but asked her daughter to sit quietly in the hallway. When Marina found out about the little house in the village, she was shocked. Quote, "My mother-in-law never told me about having her own property. Although, if you think about it, she didn't tell me about a lot of things," the daughter-in-law thought, realizing that not only did she not know Eduard, but his mother too. The meeting with the lawyer had to be urgently interrupted because a neighbor called her. At first, Marina hung up, but after 5 missed calls in a row, she finally answered and literally a couple of minutes later she was rushing home. she was informed that the apartment, it's on fire. The neighbors called the fire department in time, and the fire didn't spread to other apartments. However, Marina's apartment was seriously damaged. It was arson. The fire department's verdict was reached. Marina clutched her heart and fell to her knees. Who could have done this to her? She'd never harmed anyone in her life for them to want such revenge on her. God, I'm so glad I took you with me, Marina said through tears, hugging little Dasha. She'd originally wanted to keep her daughter at home. If something had happened to the child, she wouldn't have been able to live any longer. Is everyone safe? Ruslan asked hoarsely. Marina nodded frantically. The had come running as soon as he heard about the fire. While he ran, he silently prayed that nothing would happen to Marina and her daughter. And now, seeing them alive, he sighed with relief. By this time, Ruslan had managed to find a job as a security guard at a grocery store in the neighboring yard, and from passers-by he learned of a fire nearby. If you have nowhere to go, I can offer you my modest home, Ruslan offered, a little sheepishly. Of course, his shack was hardly suitable for a woman's life, but at least it was something. Actually, there is another option, Marina said, remembering the inheritance. Nina Grigorievna, even from heaven, you saved me, she thought silently, thanking her mother-in-law. Marina had no idea what condition the little house she now owned would be in, and so she asked Ruslan to go with her in case any urgent repairs were needed. But, to her great surprise, the house was in decent condition. Sure, the furniture was old and there was a lot of dust, but all the necessary conditions for living were present. Marina also found a small vegetable garden, as well as access to the river, where there was a wonderful view. It's so beautiful here, she smiled. Together, she and Ruslan tidied up the house in one evening. At the end of the day, the man was about to leave, but Marina held him back. I don't want to hear anything. I'm intolerant of objections, she said. We have a housewarming party to celebrate. They looked into each other's eyes for a long time. Ruslan felt like he was losing his head. He had liked Marina for a long time, and this day had proven that he was afraid of losing her. In the end, he agreed, and they spent a quiet family evening. The man would give anything to spend every day like this. If only this wonderful woman were next to him. Marina had similar thoughts. The arson case was solved rather quickly. Since Marina and her family were under close police surveillance, the arsonist was tracked down very quickly. It turned out to be none other than Eduard. He knew he could get a hefty prison sentence for his crimes, so he decided to get rid of the evidence, much of which was stored at his home. Although Edic was a clever criminal, he knew perfectly well he wouldn't survive prison. His foolish mistress couldn't find anything, so he had to act on his own. In fact, Polina wasn't particularly eager to help her lover. She knew there was a large amount of money stashed alongside the evidence, so she was more eager to find it in the apartment. However, she had already been kicked out before that, so the childless detective left empty-handed. Edic deliberately waited until his wife and daughter had left the apartment and began his search. At first, everything was going well, but then he heard a knock on the door, went berserk, and decided to burn the apartment down to ensure no one would find any incriminating evidence against him. God, what a fool he is! Marina shook her head when she learned everything. How could I have married such a man? Eduard was finally caught. When he went to visit his mistress again, the criminal naively believed the police were unaware of the field's existence. However, she, too, was under surveillance. His mistress didn't want to see him. Since she hadn't been able to find the money, she had no use for Edic. While he had been fun before, now she associated him only with trouble. And she didn't want to get involved with the police, so she tried to throw him out. Edic caused a scene, and such a loud one at that he attracted the attention of the neighbors. They were the ones who called the police. "Do you want to see your husband?" asked the investigator. "Not for anything in the world," Marina replied briskly. "Otherwise, you'll have to put me in jail too, because I won't be able to restrain myself and will kill him on the spot," she thought silently, tactfully deciding not to voice her desires. "I understand," replied the policeman. "And, by the way, I recommend hiring a lawyer, otherwise your husband will face a decent sentence." "That's great," Marina smiled broadly. "Let him answer for his actions to the fullest extent. And as for the lawyer, a state one will be enough for him." Since Eduard was behind bars for a long time, his wife got a divorce pretty quickly. Her husband desperately asked her for a meeting, but she refused. She had endured too much pain because of him. Quote, "Tell the prisoner that he should invite his mistress on a date," Marina said, which made even the always sullen investigator smile. When the chapter of her life called Eduard was successfully completed, Marina began to notice that life was gradually getting better. A couple of months later, she married Ruslan, with whom they finally moved to live in the village in a house where they did the repairs themselves and made it even more cozy. Next to them was a horse ranch, where Ruslan began to take Dasha. The girl fell in love with horses and even began to attend horseback riding lessons. Thus, a dream of becoming a first-class rider and winning horseback riding competitions appeared in her life. Marina did not recognize her daughter. Recently, Dasha's eyes were so shining, and she looked like an ordinary active child. And during the examination, which they underwent every year, a miracle happened. "Congratulations," the doctor smiled sincerely. "Is your daughter completely healthy?" For Marina, as a mother, these were the best words. She was incredibly happy. "I knew, I believed," she said, wiping away tears. 6 months after their marriage, Marina learned she was pregnant. This was a huge surprise, as she thought she would never be able to bear a child again. It was, in fact, enough for her to have Dasha. However, this news made them all incredibly happy. "I'm glad I'm having a child with you," Marina once confessed while she and Ruslan were spending an evening on the veranda. "I hope it's a boy and looks like you." "I dream of this too," her husband smiled broadly, hugging her even tighter. And their dreams were destined to come true. In due course, their son was born. If you like this story, please support me with a thumbs up button. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. All the best, M.